Hello everyone. I'm delighted to be here to welcome you to this webinar to update you on the changes to the way in which we will be inspecting ITE from January 2026. My name is Denise Olander. I am the Deputy Director for Post-16 Education and Training, so that includes further education and skills and teacher development. And I'm pleased to be joined today with colleagues who have been instrumental in the development of the new approach, the toolkit, the operating guide, and the methodology that sits behind that. So colleagues, would you mind introducing yourselves, please? I'm going to start with Andrea.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Andrea Shepherd. I am one of His Majesty's Inspectors, and I'm the Senior His Majesty's Inspector within the Teacher Development remit.
Thank you, Andrea. And Donna?
Hi everyone, I'm Donna Briggs. I'm one of His Majesty's Inspectors and I'm Specialist Advisor in the Teacher Development team.
Thank you, Donna. And I'm not sure whether Sarah can say hello. Sarah Glanville?
Yeah, hi, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Sarah Glanville and I am the policy lead for the ITE remit.
Thank you very much, Sarah, and thank you, team. And a special thank you to those of you who have kindly submitted lots of questions to us prior to the webinar. We have allocated time at the end of the session, and we've tried to weave in responses to your questions into the presentation. We'll also ask you to submit any questions that you have using the question box on the top right hand corner of the screen, and we'll do our very best to answer those questions throughout the webinar, and that will be those of us who are not presenting. So thank you very much. Next slide, please, Sarah. So here is an outline of what we are hoping to cover in the session today. We're determined to raise standards and improve lives. We know that our work is valued by ITE providers, but we also know we need to reset our relationship with the sectors we inspect. We want to improve standards and improve lives, and we will do this by considering the experience of all trainees, including those with identified SEND and those who may face barriers to their learning and/or well-being. We will also evaluate the extent to which trainees are prepared to teach pupils and learners, including those who are disadvantaged and vulnerable. Last year's Big Listen heard from many thousands of people whose feedback has helped us make changes to the way in which we work. This year we consulted on a new approach to inspecting education providers, and this includes introducing a new look Ofsted report card for trainees and the ITE sector. We have responded to the Big Listen and the February consultation by not only changing the way inspection looks, but also importantly how it feels. And we will be sharing with you the changes we will be making from January 2026 and what they mean for ITE providers. Every one of us has a desire to work for all pupils, children, learners, apprentices and trainees to make sure that they receive a high quality of education and training, and an education that enables them to achieve, belong and thrive, and of course to achieve great outcomes for everyone. And this is about raising standards. We want great outcomes for all. If we get it right for those who have barriers to overcome, we will get it right for all. And for the first time, inclusion will be the focus on every inspection. We need to be fair to providers. It's important to point out where providers don't meet the expected standards, and important to celebrate exceptionality. On all inspections, we will celebrate strengths, validate leaders' priorities and the progress that they've made since the previous inspection, and highlight where improvement is still needed. We remain committed to improving how it feels to be inspected, while continuing to encourage and support providers to raise standards for their trainees. We know that inspections can help providers focus on delivering their expectations more efficiently and effectively. And we do not want any provider to be doing what they do just for Ofsted. You do what you do for your trainees. You do not do it for Ofsted. And we are committed to working with leaders to determine the areas of focus, and Andrea will talk a little bit more about this later, to focus on the areas for on the inspection and agree the most appropriate activities tailored to each provider and the number of phases they offer their trainees. So the following slides set out Ofsted's journey over the previous few years. Leaders of education know and understand the importance of accountability given their daily responsibilities. But for many years, calls have been made to look again at the burdens created by this accountability, of which Ofsted is just one actor in a complex system. Last year, we held the Big Listen to give everyone the chance to help shape the future of our inspections. And following the Big Listen, we set out an ambition to reset relationships with the professionals we inspect, while retaining the confidence of those we work for. This included a commitment to renew the ITE inspection framework and introduce the new report cards. In February 25, a 12-week consultation set out a series of proposals for change, covering, I'm just going to talk about FES and ITE providers. And hopefully you'll see in the toolkits that we published recently, we really have taken on board all of your feedback. We received more than 6,500 responses to the online consultation. Feedback was also gathered through focus groups, which I know Andrea, Sarah and Donna have conducted with our colleagues in the sector. In-depth conversations with experts, test visits to volunteer settings, and independent qualitative and quantitative research. And as I mentioned earlier, these reforms will come into effect from January 26 for ITE. Next slide, please. Thank you very much, Sarah. So our February proposals were not set in stone, and that's, I think, really important to say. We have carefully listened to all of the feedback from the consultation, and we have tested and further refined our methodology. We believe our new approach represents the right balance between the interest of providers and trainees and the wishes of education professionals. Our core purpose and driving mission is to keep those trainees and learners and pupils safe and improve their lives. So a summary of our key changes include, firstly, a new inspection report card to highlight excellence and identify priorities for improvement, driving high and rising standards. The report card will provide more nuance for providers and trainees, combining at-a-glance grades with narrative summaries of strength and priorities for improvement. Secondly, a new 5-point grading scale to set high expectations while encouraging improvement where it's needed. And this is in response to feedback from professionals about the proposed methodology. And the final set of grades have changed to urgent improvement, needs attention, expected standard, strong standard, and exceptional. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about the expected standard. This is a high bar, and this is what we typically expect to see on inspections. And we are introducing what we are calling a secure fit. So this means that providers will need to demonstrate that they meet all of the expected standards in order to be graded as the expected standard. And if they do not meet one or more of those standards, then they will be graded to need attention. Exceptional is our opportunity for to identify the very best provision in the country. In a change from our initial proposals, providers will not be asked to submit a case study for approval. Instead, inspectors will evaluate exceptional practice by applying the toolkit and subject to the usual quality assurance and consistency checking. The third change is a renewed focus on inclusion to help break down barriers to learning and well-being. Inspectors will evaluate whether ITE providers are providing high quality support for all trainees, especially those identified with SEND. Therefore, we now have a separate evaluation area for inclusion. In addition, what trainees should learn about inclusion to support pupils and learners that they are preparing to teach is included in curriculum, teaching and training. And that's really, really important to us. So Andrea will talk later about how we will use the inclusion evaluation area to discuss with you how you identify and support those trainees that are facing barriers, but also how we will look at inclusion when we inspect the curriculum, teaching and training. The fourth key change is the new inspection toolkit for grading providers. And the toolkit shows providers and inspectors the evaluation areas that we will focus on and how we will assess and grade those providers. There are a wide range of evaluation areas in the current methodology, but following the feedback at the consultation, the number of evaluation areas has been streamlined. In response to feedback, the definition of grades have been tightened to more clearly differentiate between them. The standards covered in the toolkits have also been slimmed down to provide greater clarity on the evidence inspectors will assess. The fifth change is the new inspection methodology, which has been designed to aim to reduce workload for the education workforce. Much of our methodology comprises of inspection activities that you will already be familiar with, such as speaking to trainees and visiting training. The toolkit is designed to assess the professional standards, statutory and non-statutory requirements that are already placed on our providers. And we will evaluate providers' work to support and promote leader and staff well-being. This will be considered as part of the leadership evaluation area. Inspection findings will be grounded in a clear understanding of each provider's unique circumstances. And the new operating guide sets out how leaders and inspectors will reflect on a provider's context and priorities. And we will take more time during the planning calls to really understand your context and priorities. And then finally, we're taking a number of other steps to drive consistent and fair inspections and to reduce workload. For example, we are increasing the training for all inspectors in all remits. Experienced inspectors will oversee the inspection, building a professional relationship with the leaders, including our nominees, to deliver a more collaborative experience. Moving forward, let's have a look at the renewed approach. Next slide, please, Sarah. So our renewed approach, we're putting trainees first, breaking down barriers by raising standards, including those identified with SEND and those who may face barriers to their learning and or well-being. We will improve the way we report and the content of inspection findings. We will improve the look and feel of inspection for education providers and professionals with a more collaborative approach. And we will maintain our focus on having care and concern for the well-being and workload of the providers that we inspect. We will further take context into account on inspection, and we will make inspections consistent in approach and continue to improve our process for allowing inspections to be challenged. And we will provide constructive advice based on conversations with leaders. And if you look at each of the toolkits that we released a few weeks ago, you'll see that they are different by design. We have further tailored our inspection approach for each remit. For example, in ITE, we will work collaboratively with leaders to identify the partner organisations, early years settings, school and FE providers that inspectors will visit as soon as we possibly can. Even though the locations will be identified early on, the focus of the inspection activities carried out in those providers or settings can be tailored to meet the emerging evidence as the inspection progresses. I'm now going to hand over to Andrea.
Thank you, Denise. And as Denise did say earlier on, we are introducing a separate inclusion evaluation area. And inclusion will also be a key theme across other evaluation areas. So if we think about what those two might be as a reminder for the ITE sector, we think about a twofold approach. And firstly, that is about the extent to which trainees are prepared to teach pupils and learners who are disadvantaged, those with SEND, those known or previously known to children's social care, and who may face other barriers to their learning and or well-being. We have included in the curriculum teaching and training evaluation area grading standards that relate specifically to this important aspect of initial teacher education. And deliberately separate from that, we have in the inclusion evaluation area the extent to which trainees benefit from an inclusive environment and culture. So we know that for trainees as adult learners, there is no obligation to disclose any particular needs or barriers. So we'll consider the culture of the provider and whether trainees feel that they are able to talk to provider staff about their needs. But of course, we can't then hold providers to account for trainees who choose not to disclose their needs unless those trainees feel that they're unable to do so. And this is then the focus of the inclusion evaluation area. And when we consider the inclusive environment for trainees, we will do so with that recognition as their role as professional and adult learners. But we've also revised how we describe inclusion. And we agreed with the feedback that we received through the consultation, and that it's not necessarily for Ofsted then to define inclusion. So what we describe here is our approach to inclusion, and this has been captured in the way that we have drafted our toolkits and our inspection methodology. What we're talking about here today is specific to the inspection of ITE provision. And there are specific webinars that you may or may not be attending covering the other remits of early years, schools, further education and skills. But to think here specifically about initial teacher education, these are the 5 evaluation areas that we will evaluate against. And the inspection toolkit shows providers and inspectors the evaluation areas that we will focus inspections on and how we will evaluate and grade providers. In the final version of the toolkit, we've taken care to ensure that we are clear in our focus for each of these evaluation areas. For example, in professional behaviours, personal development and well-being, we concentrate on pastoral support for trainees, and in leadership, we have grading standards linked to the support of staff. Toolkits are one of the documents that we published, as Denise said, just a few weeks ago. What we do suggest, though, is that you read the toolkits as well as those other documents published alongside. So you will see on that same web page the operating guide and inspection information. So please do read the rest of those documents as well. But thinking now specifically about the toolkits show providers and inspectors the evaluation areas that we will focus on, how we will grade providers. And inspectors will apply the toolkit evaluation areas and those standards, but tailoring those evaluations to each provider's context. And as we've already said, nothing in those standards that are set out in the toolkits should particularly add to the workload of a provider. The toolkits are built on the statutory and the non-statutory requirements, standards, and expectations that are already placed on leaders and on their ITE provision. And what we want is inspections that can then help providers to focus on delivering their expectations more efficiently and effectively. And Denise has said, and we don't apologise for saying this again, that we don't expect providers to be doing things just for Ofsted. We don't want anything specific or anything that is additional that's not part of the day-to-day business. We don't expect providers to have completed any formal self-evaluation. However, of course, providers may then choose to use the toolkit to support their own continuing improvements. But what we will ask of leaders is that they share their strengths, their successes, and their priorities with us. Now, the general structure of the toolkit is the same in whatever remit it is that you are working in. So there's an evaluation area summary and an explanation of how this is applied to different provider contexts and phases, and an explanation of the evidence that inspectors will collect. And finally, of course, we've then got grading standards. And we've carefully reflected on those evaluation areas through the feedback from the consultation and thought about how we would then apply those for the different remits. So thinking then about the toolkit in a little bit more detail. We've got the evaluation areas. We've talked a few minutes ago about what those evaluation areas are. And within those, there is a covering page that just gives a little bit more information, a summative statement to help leaders and inspectors to understand what that evaluation area is at a glance. And those grading standards, there is a reminder here on the front page that they're based on research, inspection evidence, and of course, the statutory and non-statutory guidance. And as we then progress through the toolkit, it sets out the most significant contributory factors that underpin our approaches to evidence gathering and, of course, to grading. And this is very much based upon the research that underpins the education inspection framework and, of course, therefore, the previous ITE inspection framework. We've mentioned context. Denise has mentioned context, I've mentioned context. And within ITE inspections, that toolkit is designed to reflect all 4 phases of ITE. And as you will all know, just as we do, the statutory and non-statutory guidance for each of those phases is different. So it is for this reason that we've added a section to the curriculum, teaching and training evaluation area to add just a little bit of clarity about each of those phases. As we progress then through each evaluation area, the next part explains the evidence that inspectors will gather. And the themes are then part of the gathering evidence sections of the toolkit, and they break down into a series of evidence gathering prompts. And they are under specific themes, so you as providers and inspectors can see those themes that the inspectors will explore and the types of questions that will help to shape the gathering of evidence that inspectors carry out. And Denise mentioned earlier on that there are grades within the toolkit that we expect to see most frequently on inspection. I'm just giving that, there we go. I think there's a little bit of a lag on the slides. But these are the 3 grades out of the 5-point scale that we expect to see most often on inspection. And just as a recap, we've got urgent improvements, needs attention, expected standard, strong standard, and exceptional. What we've also got for ITE is a section on compliance, including safeguarding, but that will be a binary met, not met grade. And the evaluation areas follow with those clear grading descriptors for the proposed grades, again here, that we expect to see most frequently. For expected standard and strong standard, each grade has a set of grading standards that define the quality that is expected. And these are based, where relevant, where available, on the statutory and non-statutory guidance and the professional guidelines that are set by DfE. So when we do the grading, we will start with that middle column with expected standard to identify whether all of those grading standards have been met. And all of those standards have to be met for the grade of expected standard to be given. And as Denise mentioned earlier, this now needs to be a secure fit. If all of the expected standards are met, we can move to consider strong, where the same principles apply. All of those grading standards have to be met for that grade to be awarded. Again, a secure fit. However, if all of the expected standards are not met, the indicators for needs attention are considered to determine the extent and the urgency of the required improvements. We then have the grades that we expect to see less frequently on inspection. We still have those grades across the 5-point scale, but the ones we expect to see less frequently are urgent improvements and exceptional. As with needs attention, there are indicators for urgent improvement, and exceptional is just that. And in order to achieve that grade for an evaluation area, all of the secure and all of the strong standards have to be met, and the work of the provider needs to be transformational. So when we carry out grading on an ITE inspection, grades will continue to be awarded for each of the phases that the provider offers. So this will consist of a grade for each of the evaluation areas, but there won't be an overall effectiveness grade for the phase or indeed for the provider as a whole. And during the grading meetings, we will consider the evidence that relates only to the phase in question. So what that means, of course, is then that that grade for one particular phase will not impact on the grade for any of the others. But that said, to reduce duplication, to reduce burden on provider leaders and staff, it might be the case that the overall lead inspector or one of the phase lead inspectors might gather evidence that covers more than one phase on a multi-phase inspection. So, for example, the overall lead might talk to leaders about their approach to inclusion, or they might speak to those people who are responsible for oversight. One of the phase lead inspectors might meet with lead mentors that cover both primary and secondary provision. But what those inspectors will then do is make sure that they share the pertinent points as needed to ensure that the evidence base for each of the phases is robust. Let's just remind ourselves then of some of the key aspects underpinning the new approach. So we are moving towards a more supportive, empathetic approach to inspections in which the starting point will be the expected standard. And we will further take each provider's context into account. So for example, whether that provider is then a small local provider or whether that the ITE provision is part of a very large and complex partnership. We will adopt a more collaborative approach. And in the testing of our inspection methodology, we've revised our approach to make sure the inspection does feel like a more collaborative process. We will be consistent in our approach to inspections and continue to improve our process for providers to feed back to us about their inspection experience. And Denise mentioned this earlier, that we will provide constructive advice on improvements based on the inspection evidence and those conversations throughout the inspection with leaders. And we will do all of this through a values-driven approach to inspections that is professional, empathetic, respectful, and courteous. And the Ofsted Academy will run the largest package of training that Ofsted has ever offered for an inspection launch, alongside webinars like these and events that we will be carrying out throughout the autumn for education professionals. We've talked about some of the elements of an ITE inspection that will be different as we move into the renewed framework. And one of those other elements is the timing of the notification of an ITE inspection. Following the big listen, we committed to review the notification period for ITE inspections. We carefully considered the new market structures and the many different partnership arrangements within ITE providers to inform our approach. And during our testing events, we tried different notification periods to find a balance between the planning being spread over too long a period and leaders having enough time to make the necessary arrangements for visits to placement providers and to employers, particularly where there are partner organisations such as colleges or training partners involved. So as a result, the notification period for all ITE inspections has been extended from 3 working days to 5 working days. But the inspections will still take place over 4 days in the same week. So what will happen then before an inspector arrives on site? In the notification call, we will invite provider leaders to identify a nominee or nominees. However, these aren't compulsory roles, and there isn't a problem at all with not having one. And it may be that in some providers, leaders choose to take on that role themselves. A number of planning calls will then take place between the notification and the inspectors arriving on site. And during these planning calls, the overall leads or the lead inspector or the relevant phase lead inspector will work with leaders and the nominees, if there are nominees, to identify reasonable adjustments that need to be made and to make sure that provider leaders have what they need for the inspection. So the overall leads, the lead inspector, the phase lead inspectors will work collaboratively with leaders and the nominees to plan a timetable for the inspection that will enable inspectors to gather the evidence they need to make grading decisions. And all of this will be based on collaborative and professional discussion. Now, the structure of the planning itself will vary according to the context of the provider and the leadership structures for their ITE provision. For example, on multi-phase inspection, the balance between the central and the phase planning will vary according to those management structures. The on-site activities of the ITE inspection will then be completed over all 4 days. And inspectors will gather evidence to enable them to celebrate strengths in achievement, belonging, and ability to thrive. But to just take a moment to think about each of those terms as they apply to ITE. So for achieve in ITE, we focus on the extent to which trainees are prepared to teach their phase and subjects, and how they are prepared to do this well and to successfully complete their qualification. For belonging, we consider the extent to which trainees feel welcomed and valued as trainee teachers and professionals in their teaching community. When we consider thrive on an ITE inspection, we look at how trainees benefit from an ITE curriculum that enables them to ensure the pupils and learners that they will then teach are kept safe and able to flourish, whatever their background or individual needs. So we keep that celebrate, highlight leaders' priorities and progress, validate leaders' priorities and progress, and highlight priorities for improvement. But the new methodology gives us more flexibility to carry out inspection activities across the 4 days. Day 1 will always start with a whole team meeting. And what we will do in that initial meeting is invite provider leaders to share contextual information about their ITE provision. Now, what this will do is build upon conversations held during the planning stage, and it will ensure that the whole inspection team understand the context of the provider In multi-phase providers, this might be split into different meetings for some of the time, so that the phase teams then have an understanding of the phase they are inspecting and the ITE curriculum within it. Some team inspectors might join that initial meeting remotely, depending on the geographical location of the activities that they are scheduled to complete. And once we've had the initial meeting, inspectors will start their inspection activities. And for team inspectors, this might then include discussions with teacher educators and or provider staff, or visits to trainees who are on placement or in the workplace. The overall leads, or the phase lead inspectors are likely to remain at the main inspection location for meetings with provider leaders and staff about the toolkit evaluation areas. So they might make calls to trainees and mentors if that is needed, but they also need to make sure that the inspection is running smoothly, and they will take the lead on gathering evidence for some of the evaluation areas. Also, throughout the inspection, the relevant lead inspector will keep leaders and the nominees, if they are there, informed about the emerging findings. And this will then inform additional activities for inspectors to complete. And then as we move to report cards, as you can see here, the report card will show the grades for each evaluation area. And that's within the phase. In this case, we can see an example for early years. And then there is a narrative that gives a detailed picture of performance. And this is designed to give both clarity and simplicity. The ITE report cards will contain simple data about the ITE provider. And this will cover trainee numbers and the partners that providers work with for the delivery of their ITE programme as a whole, or those who are providing teaching practice opportunities for trainees. And this is to provide context about the provider. There won't be any performance data on ITE report cards. Each phase of provision will be reported on separately to align with the structure of the inspection. And the information, such as the number of trainees that I've just mentioned, will then be included in the About This Provider section. Any re-inspection activity will then be identified in the Update section, so it's clear which grades and which text relate to different events. And that gives us then the leads to think about those points post-inspection. We will still follow the same arrangements for sending the draft report card, normally within 18 working days. After the inspection, for you as providers to then consider and submit factual comments. The final report card is normally published within 30 working days of the end of the inspection, all of those things that we're used to. Now, where an evaluation area is graded less than the expected standard in any phase, the provider will have a re-inspection of that evaluation area. All evaluation areas that are graded less than the expected standard will be part of the same re-inspection. And re-inspections will take place within 12 months of the full inspection report card being published online. But the team size and the duration of a re-inspection will be proportionate to the number of evaluation areas that are graded less than expected standard. So we've given lots of information across the slides in this webinar. And just to recap on some of those changes. The 5-point grading scale will be used for all 5 of the evaluation areas in ITE. Compliance, including safeguarding, will be graded as met or not met. As previously mentioned, there is an increased focus on inclusion, including considering how well trainees are supported with any specific barriers to their own learning and or well-being. The ITE toolkit also includes a specific evaluation area that considers professional behaviours, personal development and well-being, which is standards about how well trainees then develop the professional behaviours that they need to be a teacher. And the focus, again, we've mentioned this once or twice, the focus should still be on the preparedness of that trainee to be a teacher. During the big listen and the consultation, providers raised concern about the 3-day notification period. We said that we would review that, and we've increased that notification window from 3 to 5 working days. But what we won't do anymore is carry out focused reviews on ITE inspections. So we will continue to carry out inspection activities the same way as those that we are used to do. So we will talk to trainees, we will talk to teacher educators, we will talk to mentors, we will visit trainees in the workplace. We will do all of those activities that we would ordinarily carry out on inspection. But what we now have is more flexibility in the way that we select the trainees to speak to, the timing of those activities, and how those activities will be spread across the week. So the lead inspector will work with the nominees and leaders to plan a timetable of inspection activities. And as the inspection progresses, this can be flexed so that there can be then a specific focus to the activities in order to fill any gaps or to address concerns from earlier in the inspection. What this won't involve is last minute requests to visit more placement providers or employers. But there are a number of things that haven't changed, and this is a renewed framework where inspections will look and feel different. But in ITE, we still want to know the extent to which trainees are being prepared to teach their phase and subjects well. So finally, to just look at the timeline for change. We will be hosting a number of engagement events regionally, as well as hosting webinars and attending sector events. All education inspectors will also complete training to support the transition to the renewed frameworks before that they are deployed on a live inspection. And for openness and transparency, those training materials will be published online, and that will be through the Ofsted Academy once the inspectors have completed their training. And in addition to the training package, we will continue to undertake pilot visits to volunteer settings. So this will give inspectors the vital experience of full end-to-end inspections before the start of the ITE inspections. And we will resume our routine ITE inspections in the spring term of 2026 as planned. So finally then, you have probably all already found the documents. If you haven't, please do scan the QR code and that will take you to the toolkits and the supporting evidence around those. So thank you very much for taking the time to come to our webinar this afternoon. We did say that we would leave time to answer any questions that you may have. So I will now ask Donna, who's been carefully monitoring those questions, to highlight and ask if there are any that have particular themes or any that link into those pre-submitted questions.
Yes. So, Andrea, I've been doing my best to answer as many questions as I have going through, but there's quite a few that follow similar themes. So I thought it would be useful if we talked about some of those now and take on board some of those pre-submitted questions as well.
Thank you, Donna.
So there are a number of questions, Andrea, about our ITE cycle and when providers can expect ITE inspections.
So our ITE cycle, we will start that cycle again in spring 2026, and that cycle will then be 4 years. And providers will normally therefore expect to receive one routine inspection during that 4-year period.
Okay, thank you, Andrea. We've got a few questions as well linked together about what do we at Ofsted mean by phase. And that was exemplified by one question asking if they have a 3 to 7 and a 5 to 11 route into teaching, would they both be classed as the primary phase?
So yes, the question about phase is very much then focused on the age of the people that those trainees are preparing to teach. The early years, primary and secondary, and further education and skills. And you gave 2 examples there, Donna, of the primary routes into teaching. And the ultimate question, I guess, for a provider and to help determine where that would sit is what it is that those trainees are working towards. So those 2 routes, the examples you gave there, Donna, of course, both would lead to QTS, so therefore would sit in the primary phase as opposed to early years.
Okay, thank you. And we're getting a few questions through, and I think it's really important for us to clarify this here. We're getting some questions through, Andrea, asking us if we're going to continue with deep dive / focused reviews.
So the focused reviews themselves, as a way of gathering evidence, we won't continue with focused reviews. What we will do is carry out many of the same activities that we have always done on ITE inspections. And we will talk to trainees, we will talk to mentors, we will visit the trainees in their workplace, etc. So we can gather evidence in all of those same ways. But what we now have is a more flexible approach, which means that we can carry out activities in a different order, or there might be slightly more flexibility in the way that we select the trainees or those groups of trainees that we want to talk to or meet as the inspection progresses.
Super, thank you. And just to say it out loud, I have answered it in the chat, but there will be nominee training available in due course because we've had lots of questions about that as well. We do have a question, Andrea, that I think is reasonably topical for us. And it's around our urgent improvement indicator in curriculum, teaching and training, around what we consider to be discredited research.
Thank you. So in terms of that indicator, what we don't do, and certainly what we won't do, is go to any provider with a list of what discredited research is or could include. What we've done is of course, we're following here the ITE ECF as one of those pieces of statutory guidance that underpins the toolkit. And how that talks about trainees learning about the variability and reliability of research. But what we want then those trainees to do is to develop criticality and to be able to understand how to critique and work out where those evidence-based approaches are. So what inspectors will do is talk to leaders and talk to teacher educators about the research base that underpins their curriculum and the rationale for that, and then of course the ways in which trainees learn to critique and identify the most relevant and up-to-date research for them.
Thank you, Andrea. We've had a few questions, both pre-submitted and a few questions online today around our experience of inspectors who will inspect in the ITE phase.
So thank you. And of course, at Ofsted, we continue to value the expertise of professionals who, in this case, are working in ITE. And who have experience of working in the ITE sector. So we do always welcome interest from people working in the sector to come and work with us as an Ofsted inspector. To continue to drive consistent and fair inspections, ITE inspections will be led by full-time His Majesty's inspectors that we employ directly. And that there may be examples whereby inspection leads might also be somebody who's recently left Ofsted, being an experienced HMI or senior HMI. But what we will then do is consider then the OIs that we use as team inspectors, the Ofsted inspectors that we use as team inspectors, who then bring with them the currency and that wealth of experience of the ITE sector.
Okay, thank you, Andrea. I'm getting lots and lots more questions coming in as we're talking as well, so I'm not sure we're going to get to all of them in the few minutes we have left, but let me ask a few others. So this has been asked with a primary lens, but also a secondary lens, because we know there can be many subjects there as well. But how will our inspections take account, if I ask you this for primary, for the breadth and depth of knowledge required across all primary subjects when we're looking at that primary phase?
So thinking then specifically about the primary phase, inspectors will be thinking about how the provider prepares trainees to teach the national curriculum subjects, as well as thinking maybe then about the areas for learning and development in reception and early years. So what we need to think about is enabling trainees to understand the curriculum that their pupils and learners will study. And thinking about that in the key stage before and after. Now, where relevant, of course, you did mention their secondary as well.
Yes.
But the activities that we then carry out, and that series of activities that we carry out, will then consider the preparedness, again, if we think about primary, the preparedness to teach those national curriculum subjects.
Thank you. And we've had a few questions from the colleagues providers who are on the call today, asking about how we're really going to differentiate between expected standard, strong standard, and exceptional. So they're asking questions about that language we've used in the toolkit.
So since the consultation toolkit, the toolkit that we published in the consultation, we've worked to increase the amount of delineation between secure and strong. And we have specific sort of language and things that would apply within each of those. Again, thinking and going back, just to take a step back to some of what we talked about earlier, and the secure fit. So for expected, we would work through those grading standards and thinking about the language then in terms of that people would generally or would typically do the things that are in those grading standards. So we might see things like largely and broadly, so that it's sort of pretty much this is what happens within that provision. But then as we move to strong, of course, all of those standards, grading standards already being met in expected, we would then move to strong, which is much more then about consistency and things being truly embedded to demonstrate then the extent to which the provision is meeting those grading standards that sit in the strong standard.
Okay, thank you, Andrea. We have had lots and lots of questions. I know that you've answered this, and I don't think there's anything more to add. But just to acknowledge, we've had lots of questions from providers asking us, so exactly when in that 4-year cycle will we look to be inspected? I don't know if there's anything you want to say on that.
It's the 4-year cycle is one that will start, as we said, from the spring of 2026. We we don't give a particular indication as to when that will happen beyond those providers who are newly accredited to deliver primary and or secondary phase, the provision leading to QTS. And in those cases, we do say that we would normally inspect that provision in the second year of operation.
Thank you. And then I think this will probably be our final question, collating a few questions, but it is about data and what data we might ask the provider to provide to us on inspection, or what data might be on the report card.
So in terms of the data, I'm going to take that back to front. So the data that's on the report card will be simply to provide context. So that will identify the number of trainees, and that will then identify the routes into teaching, for example, that those trainees are following, and give a little bit of context about the provider or the partnership. And that's the purpose of the information and the data that we've got on the report card. There won't be the other remits do have performance data, and there will be things about achievements. We don't have that same data on the report cards for ITE. And in terms of the data on inspection, there isn't a requirement for any sort of hard and fast and specific data to be produced in any particular format. We will, of course, look at what leaders and managers have in place, how they use their data, and the lead inspectors will talk to those leaders and managers about that data and how that data is used, and to understand then the context of trainees completing their qualifications, and reference that to the standards in terms of, do leaders understand the progress? Do leaders understand that trainees are engaging and developing through their attendance at the training sessions and through their teaching practice, that they are then engaging and developing the teaching skills and the knowledge that they will need to teach their phase and subject well?
Okay, thank you, Andrea. I think we've answered as many questions as we can for now.
Perfect timing.
With perfect timing.
So in which case, thank you once again to everybody for joining us this afternoon. We really do hope that you have found it useful. Thank you again.